Well, ladies and gentlemen, after a good long wait, it finally happened. The second DLC of Final Fantasy XVI, The Rising Tide, has finally released, and I just recently beat it. And I gotta say, I like it. I liked it quite a bit. I dare say I liked it even more than the Echoes of the Fallen DLC we got earlier this year, as I felt it was not only a more compact and interesting DLC, but also a more fun one gameplay-wise. But why exactly do I think that? Well, I've got a few reasons for it, but I admit, I've also got some complaints. So let's just quit my yapping and get into my review of Final Fantasy XVI, The Rising Tide. Okay, so for this review, I'ma just do you all a favor and skip over the graphics section. Because, come on. I already said the game looks beautiful in my review of Final Fantasy XVI. I'm pretty certain I said it looks beautiful in the Echoes of the Fallen DLC. You know, it looks pretty. I know it looks pretty. We all know it looks pretty by now. I'm not going to jam it down those pretty little necks of yours again. So I'm instead just going to focus solely on the gameplay and the story instead. So to start off, let's get into the story of the DLC first. As you can probably guess from not only the DLC title, but also the promotional trailer for this game, this DLC revolves around Leviathan, the final icon that never appeared in the main game due to apparently hiding away from Ultima. He was mentioned a few times in the main story, but no one really knew where the fuck he was. That is until Clive gets a letter explaining that there is a group of people hiding away Leviathan in a special hidden area that only the clan know of. And from there, you learn just what happened to this mighty sea creature. Honestly, the reveal of the Dominant himself was pretty shocking. To be honest, my original theory for the guy was that Leviathan's Dominant was going to be this 10th level badass that had such a mastery over his icon that he would be able to completely be untraceable by anyone. But boy, was I way off mark. In actuality, it was a baby who was the Dominant. Okay, so a little explanation. The story behind it is that when this baby, named Wajius, I believe is how you say his name, was born, they sealed Leviathan in him so he could be raised as a weapon. He's just simply a kid, sadly being caught in the cycle of dominance, being treated as nothing more than weapons to people. And if it went as planned, that's what would have happened. Except for one thing. That one thing was Leviathan itself. See, he awakened much earlier than expected and started rampaging around so much they had to straight up put him in stasis to stop him from destroying everything around him. And then, after waiting a while, they finally decided to employ Clyde Services to help him get rid of the icon. And as you can probably guess, shit goes wrong pretty fast and you have to deal with it as per usual. Thankfully, it's something Clive is used to. And that gives me a good segue to start talking about the gameplay. Now, gameplay is what you'd expect from 16 at this point. Fast, fluid, responsive, but it's shaken up a bit from the all-new Leviathan icon power you obtain, which I want to say was really nice that we didn't have to wait until the very end of the DLC to get your hands on it. You get it in like the first 20 minutes, and you just get to go nuts. And if I'm being real, the Leviathan icon powers are probably now my second favorite icon power that you get in the entire game. I like that Leviathan has more of a focus on mid to long range combat, which allows more balance and variety to the rest of your arsenal. I also enjoy the concept of it basically just being a gun that relies on refueling before you hit zero, with the chance to get unlimited arrow if you time it right. Plus it adds this cool extra length to your R1 dodge, giving you more mobility in battle, letting you just zip around and shoot stuff with your big dragon shotgun thing. And what will you be using this new icon on? Why, you will be using it on one of the best parts of this DLC, and that's the bosses. Now, there aren't exactly a lot of bosses in The Rising Tide, but I think the ones we got were great. Of course, the two standout ones were the final fights. First was Leviathan himself, the final battle of the DLC, who you fight in your icon form, and is probably the second best icon battle in the entire series. Sorry, nothing's topping that Titan battle in pure hype and scope, but it was still great to get another intense kaiju explosion battle. And then there was the best fight in the DLC, and that was with the Timekeeper, which is basically just Shiva's guardian, I guess? It's difficult, well designed, and has one of the best moments in the entire game, where during battle he will freeze time and summon just dozens of weapons to throw at you, and you gotta dodge when you break out of stasis. It's easily the best designed boss in the DLC, and probably one of the best fights next to Omega Weapon and Barbados. Honestly, the DLC is pretty much worth it for this fight alone in my opinion. And outside of that, that's all for my pros, so I think it's time we talked about the cons. Let us begin, shall we? Alright, time for the cons. I don't have a whole lot for, Rising Tide's DLC's cons, but there was definitely one that I want to talk about. And it's probably the biggest elephant in the room here. Let's talk about Jill. So if you were following the DLC news like I was, you would remember that it was mentioned Jill was going to be a more prominent part of the Rising Tide story. And after playing through the Rising Tide myself, I guess that was just straight up bullshit. The only point in the story that Jill has any importance is in the Timekeeper boss, and that's just a small exposition dump about the lore of the Timekeeper. So, I guess they just lied straight to our face then? What the fuck was the point of the false advertising? Was it to bring in more people? That's really the only thing I can think of, but that's not really needed. 16 has a dedicated fan base, myself included. There wasn't any real reason to lie about that. We would have bought the DLC for Leviathan in the pure and simple fact we like the game. So just why pull this? It just leaves you a bad taste in your mouth at the fact we were promised something that just wasn't there. A big complaint of the original game was how, while Jill was a good character, she didn't have a whole lot of screen time. So this could have been a perfect chance to flesh it out, and I guess they just didn't? My theory for it is that originally Jill was going to have more of a role here. Maybe Shiva and Leviathan would have some strange connection to each other due to water and ice usually having that kind of resemblance in storytelling. And it just straight up got scrapped at some points, probably due to time constraints or something. I don't know. I wasn't in the meeting rooms for this. All I do know is that we were basically lied to. And that honestly sucks. Other than that, there's only one other con, and it's something I mentioned in my first DLC review of 16. And that this DLC will not change your mind of 16 either. It's better than Echoes of the Fallen, sure, but neither will change your mind on 16 if you didn't like mainline 16. If you loved Final Fantasy 16, you'll like this. If you hated 16, you won't. It's pretty simple. With that said and done, let's get to my final thoughts. Final Fantasy 16, The Rising Tide, is obviously guilty of some false promises. That part is very much true. But in the end, I had a lot of fun with it. I even still stand by the fact that I think it was better than the Echoes of the Fallen DLC. And that is why my final rating for this DLC is a very satisfying 7.5 out of 10. And that's it for this review, folks. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed what you saw, do me a favor and like and sub down below, and leave a comment down below to give me the power of the algorithm. Or if you just want to chat, I'm cool with whatever. Have a great day, and I will see you next time for more RPG content.